Patreon supporter Arix Methes sponsors this week's episode as we shine a light on the feline Decepticon who stalks in the shadows. These are the basics on RAVAGE. The toy that would become the original RAVAGE was first released in the Japanese toy line Microchange in 1983 and was imported by Hasbro to become part of the first year of the Transformers toy line in 1984. He was one of the line's many mini-cassette figures, transforming from microcassette tape to robotic jaguar, though many fans, and even the occasional piece of official media, have sometimes mistakenly believed him to be a dog. He was designed to fit inside the Decepticon cassette player Soundwave, and was sold in a 2-pack with fellow tape Rumble. The profile for Ravage, written by Marvel Comics writer Bob Budiansky, characterized him as a cunning master of stealth, a cold and distant solo operator with enhanced senses and the ability to become invisible in shadow. The profile gave Ravage the function of saboteur, but in practice, Transformers media tended to cast him more in the role of a spy and a hunter. Now, Ravage was handled in two very different ways by the Transformers animated series and the Marvel comic book. The cartoon treated him the same way it did all the animal form cassette Transformers like him, less like a sapient being and more like an actual animal who was subservient to Soundwave and who couldn't talk. Save for one unusual instance where he was able to speak by transforming into cassette mode and having Soundwave play his voice.
The rocket base is 140 kilometers due west of the Autobot camp.
Ravage was a regular cast member in the show's first 2 seasons, serving as Soundwave's hunter and enforcer, his small size making him a frequent opponent for Spike Witwicky and Bumblebee. He would also often accompany his master on spying missions. Memorably, the show's pilot miniseries saw him captured by the Autobots after such a mission went wrong, and used to feed false information to the Decepticons. In the Marvel comic, on the other hand, Ravage was a fully sapient Decepticon with the power of speech, who generally worked independent of Soundwave. He featured prominently in the earliest issues of the series, gathering information about Earth and battling the Autobot Mirage. Later issues would phase out his ability to speak to bring the comic version of the character more in line with the cartoon, but this change wasn't reflected in the original stories created for the United Kingdom's version of the series, in which he continued to speak. These UK adventures saw Ravage clash with the treacherous Starscream and team up with the Autobot Windcharger to defeat the rogue computer Anti, and also explored his backstory, establishing that he had once been the bodyguard of the last of the Autobot overlords, who turned traitor to become the first of Megatron's Decepticons and one of his most loyal followers. Ravage's toy was one of only a small handful of figures from 1984 that was still being sold in 1986, which earned him appearances in both the Transformers the movie and the subsequent 3rd season of the cartoon, and he would even feature in the Japanese original sequel series, The Headmasters. In the comic book, however, Ravage was killed off in mid-1986, while his toy was still on shelves, when the Autobot skids deactivated him by tricking him into falling down a mineshaft. Though no further toys of Ravage were released in the original series, he would still return to life in the comics pages a few years later. The UK series detailed how he was reactivated by an earthquake, and he went on to appear on and off throughout the final years of both the UK and US series, his loyalty switching back and forth between Megatron and rival Decepticon leader Shockwave. Depictions of Ravage in the decades since the original series have gone back and forth between the animal-like Decepticon of the cartoon and the intelligent, articulate robot of the comic. The intelligent portrayal was the first to be revisited when, in 1998, Ravage made an unexpected return in the Beast Wars animated series. Set centuries after the end of the Autobot-Decepticon War, this series featured a future version of Ravage who had been rebuilt from his original form into a humanoid Predacon. With enhanced invisibility powers and a Russian accent, he now served the Predacon rulers, the Tri-Predacus Council, as a covert agent. RAVAGE was tasked by the Council with apprehending the rogue Predacon criminal Megatron, who had travelled back in time to prehistoric Earth. RAVAGE followed, but was shocked to discover that Megatron was enacting a secret plan that had been left behind by RAVAGE's old leader, the original Megatron, to alter history and make it so that the Decepticons would win the war. Still loyal to the Decepticon cause, RAVAGE joined Megatron's side, but was then destroyed when the heroic Maximals blew up his spacecraft.
Decepticons forever!
RAVAGE was designed for the cartoon and wasn't initially part of the Beast Wars toy line. But when the series aired in Japan the following year, a Japanese exclusive figure of him was released. Within the cartoon itself, he still transformed into his old cassette alternate mode, but the toy, a retool of the Beast Wars Transmetal Cheetor figure, converted into a mechanical big cat. Beast Wars represented a significant evolution for RAVAGE, and its interpretation of the character proved an enduring one, with several further toys of the Predacon RAVAGE being released over the years, some with beast modes and some with vehicular alternate modes. His story has even been continued after the events of the cartoon, with media from both America and Japan offering a variety of different accounts of how he was revived after his death and continued in his efforts to manipulate the time stream. The first brand new incarnation of RAVAGE debuted in 2004's TRENSFORMERS ENERGON. Known as Battle Ravage for trademark reasons, he was a non-verbal animal like the Ravage of the original cartoon, without emotion or mercy. He was one of the Terrorcons who served the alien Alpha Quintesson and transformed from a humanoid robot into a robotic cougar. This Ravage was also handled in two very different ways, by the ENERGON comic and animated series. In the comic, he was a former Decepticon who had sided with Alpha Quintesson in return for a power upgrade. While in the cartoon, Battle Ravage wasn't a singular being, but a kind of mass-produced Terrorcon drone created by Alpha Quintesson from the remains of his destroyed planet's dead inhabitants. A stealth-equipped variation of the drones also existed, known as Command Ravage. RAVAGE was considered for inclusion in the first live-action movie in 2007, but his place in the story was ultimately taken by Scorponok, meaning RAVAGE had to wait for the 2009 sequel Revenge of the Fallen to make his live-action debut. The movie also went with a cartoon-style animalistic RAVAGE, who transformed into an airborne re-entry mode that he used to descend through Earth's atmosphere after he was deployed to the planet by the orbiting Soundwave. Infiltrating the Autobots' base, RAVAGE and the razor-thin Decepticon Reedman stole the last remaining shard of the life-giving Allspark. RAVAGE was subsequently destroyed by Bumblebee during a battle in Egypt, but tie-in comic books that followed the film told the story of how his remains were recovered by the human cabal known as the Initiative, who reanimated and reprogrammed him to serve them, until Soundwave rescued him. One of RAVAGE's largest roles in the last few years has been in the world of IDW Publishing's comic books, which blended his two classic depictions together to present him as both an intelligent, speaking character and a faithful follower of Soundwave's. In IDW's universe, RAVAGE and Soundwave first met when Soundwave was living on the streets, driven nearly insane by his inability to control his mind-reading powers. Experienced in dealing with enhanced senses, RAVAGE taught Soundwave how to focus and control his abilities, and the pair became loyal friends who joined the Decepticons together. Years later, when an aging and weary Megatron renounced Decepticonism and joined the crew of the starship Lost Light, RAVAGE stowed away on the vessel to investigate this change in his former leader's demeanour. Though hurt and saddened by Megatron's decision to change sides, an encounter with the vicious Decepticon Justice Division opened RAVAGE's eyes to how warped the Decepticon cause had truly become, and he accepted Megatron's offer to remain on the ship with him. RAVAGE would ultimately meet his end at the hands of the DJD's leader, Tarn, his death sensed by Soundwave from across the universe, as with his final words, he entreated Megatron not to return to who he had once been. The consistent popularity of Soundwave and his cassette gimmick down through Transformers history has ensured that new toys of Ravage with his original tape mode have been released in the 21st century, including even one of his mirror universe self from the world of Shattered Glass, where instead of a cold, merciless master of stealth, he's a cheerful social media addict who talks like a lolcat. But the dated nature of Ravage's classic alternate mode has also led to efforts to update his form for the modern era. New alt modes sported by various incarnations of the character over the last decade have included a Cybertronian data disk, a working USB flash drive, a tablet computer, simply a chest plate for Soundwave, and even a Jaguar sports car. In his most recent appearances though, Ravage is back to folding up into a rectangle to fit inside Soundwave's chest door, as seen in the Bumblebee live-action movie in which he emerged to take on Optimus Prime, and in 2019's War for Cybertron Siege toy line, which labelled his alternate mode as a kind of armoured shield. But regardless of the form he takes, whether he's a cunning talker or a silent stalker, Ravage is one black cat that you definitely don't want to cross paths with. And those are the basics on Ravage, thanks to Arix Matthews for sponsoring this episode. Do you prefer your Ravage talking or just growling? Speak up in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Transformers history and lore, and if you can, consider supporting the series on Patreon.